Welcome to Spainguru's free Spanish non-lucrative visa webinar. Today is April 23rd, 2025. My name is Bruno Bianchi Sarcone and I run Spainguru.es. The way that I structured this webinar is a timeline before the application, during the application, and after the approval. We're going to go through some definitions, talk about consulates, BLS offices, tourists, and resident status in Spain, tax considerations, a few slides about taxes. They are very important. Non-lucrative visa eligibility and requirements. We're going to go through the requirement lists and we're going to go in depth into each one of them. Then we're going to talk about during the application, the timing, the application process, and after the approval, how you arrive to Spain, step by step, what you have to do once you are in Spain, if you plan to renew, obtain long-term residence, or even Spanish citizenship, all the requirements, and potentially, if you plan to transition to work permit, also give you some options. A small disclaimer here, the content of this webinar is for information purposes only and is not legal advice. The requirements listed here are not official. Please check your specific consulates, requirements, or BLS offices. Now, a little bit about Spainguru before we start. Our objective is facilitating the relocation process for English-speaking foreigners to Spain since 2014, so a little over 10 years. And we have some pretty good reviews. And there you can see on the top bar, green bar there is a red button. If you feel that the information that I will share today with you is useful and you learn something new, make sure to leave a review on Trustpilot that will absolutely make my day. And not only about this webinar, but about Spainguru in general and Spainguru community. Just write your comment there. That would be amazing. How you can use Spainguru? You have a lot of free resources, weekly newsletter that I send every Monday, YouTube channel, 1 video per day, blog posts, more than 1,700 articles, and a huge community formed by Facebook groups and Reddit with an aggregated 140,000 members. And if you haven't joined the Spanish non-lucrative visa dedicated group on Facebook, please join it today. It is by far the largest out there with 20,000 members. And of course, if you need help with different services related to the Spanish non-lucrative visa, you have lawyers, tax advisors, health insurance for NLV compliant policies, medical certificates, sworn translations, all those you will need. Many of them you will need, many of those services you will need, even if you plan to do it yourself. And apostille services in the US and UK, and many other services, more than 100 services, all personally vetted by me. Most of them I have been recommending them for several years, so they stood the test of time. Enough about Spainguru, and now let's go with the timeline. Let's talk about before the application and some considerations to have in mind. First of all, what is the Spanish non-lucrative visa? It's a Spanish visa for non-EU citizens who can financially support themselves and who don't need to work in Spain. This Spanish visa is defined first and above all in the Ley Orgánica 4/2000 and the regulation of that law that will change and take effect on May 20th, 2025. So until that date, in less than 1 month, we're still having the current or old regulation of the law. And after May 20th, 2025, we will have to observe the changes applied at the new ruling or reglamento of the main law. Now, consulates in the US, UK, Canada, and I recently also added Australia to Spainguru. You can only apply for the Spanish non-lucrative visa from the consulate, Spanish consulate that serves the area in which you are a legal resident, or if you're a dual passport holder from the country where you are from. For example, if you hold a Colombian passport and US passport, and you happen to be in Colombia, but you live in the USA, potentially you could also apply from a Spanish consulate in Colombia. On Spainguru.es/Spain non-lucrative visa, you can find all the different consulates in these 4 countries. And it is quite interesting because I aggregate all the content and all the relevant official links for each of those consulates. And when I say it's interesting, because as you probably know, every single consulate is very different from each other. They have different interpretations of the rules, and it is very important that you stay on top of every news that you can grab and personal experiences from people who are applying. So here's an example. If you go to the New York page on spainguru.es, you will find, for example, first-hand experiences from other community members who tell you a lot of tricks and tips that I'm sure are going to be useful for you. Now, most of consulates in these countries work with BLS International. For example, in the UK, all the consulates in the US, most of the consulates outsource their services for the Spanish non-lucrative visa procedure to BLS International, which is an Indian company listed in the Indian Stock Exchange with operations in 64 countries. It's a huge company. So the first thing you have to do after you have found out which is your Spanish consulate is understanding whether this visa in particular is outsourced to BLS. In that case, you will deal with BLS International's office in the city of the Spanish consulate. For example, New York still does directly without BLS their non-lucrative visa process, but for example, Miami, now Los Angeles, San Francisco, Houston, etc., they deal with BLS in their cities. Now, let's talk about the visa requirements for Spain. Tourist visa eligibility. British, US, Canada, Australia citizens can stay in Spain and other Schengen countries for up to 90 days within a 6-month period, rolling period, without needing a tourist visa. Schengen area is a group of 28 European countries, which is internally borderless. Some nationalities will require a Schengen visa to enter this space as a tourist, for example, the Philippines. Now, there is a general visa requirement if a non-EU national wants to stay in Spain for more than the allowed 90 days. And for that, you must secure a temporary or a long-term visa from Spain, okay? You cannot use a temporary or long-term visa from another Schengen country in Spain. The non-lucrative visa is a temporary visa that will allow you to obtain a non-lucrative residency, okay, for up to 5 years with an extraordinary renewals. It's said that it is a temporary visa because it is meant to last for 5 years. So visas who long more than 5 years are considered long-term visa. Now, citizens from European Union countries and associate countries like Switzerland, Norway, Iceland, etc., as well as their spouses, are exempt from this visa requirement, and they must fulfill other conditions. Okay, for example, if you are an EU passport holder or you are married or legal couple of one, then you would go for the EU family card, and it will be different requirements, softer requirements than the non-lucrative visa. The residence will be valid for 5 years and will include a work permit for Spanish companies. So if that is your case, this webinar is not for you, and this visa, of course, is not for you. Otherwise, you will have to apply for a visa such as the non-lucrative visa. Now let's go to some considerations about taxes. So you have to have lined up your immigration options and your taxation options, and they have to be synchronized so that everything fits correctly. Now, the most important concept to have in mind, you become a tax resident in Spain, and tax resident, okay, I'm talking only about tax residency, and you must pay, in such case, tax on your global income and potentially on the value of your assets as of December 31st. If you spend over 183 days in Spain, physically in Spain, within a calendar year from January 1st to December 31st. And those days don't need to be consecutive, and it's regardless of your immigration status. For example, if you arrive as a tourist at the beginning of the year, you do a scouting trip of 20 days, and then you get your non-lucrative visa in the second half of the year, those days will all add up to your tax residency. Then there are two other conditions for becoming a Spanish tax resident. That is, if your main economic activity or primary income source is in Spain, and if your spouse and children live in Spain, you could also be deemed to be a tax resident in Spain. Now let's have a little tax overview. This is a very, very summarized list. First, you have your income tax with deadline on June 30th with progressive rates that range from 19% to 47%. They vary by region, and it will depend on how much income you have. And this is a very commonly asked question. If you make 100,000 euros, that will fall in the fifth tax bracket. That is 45%. Will I pay 45% for that income? The answer is no. That's why it's called progressive brackets, because your first 12,450 euros of your income pay 19%. The remaining then the next 7,500 euros pay 24%, and makes you pay effectively a 37% tax rate on your 100K income. These, of course, are ballpark figures so that you understand how the tax brackets work. Then you have the Form 720, which is foreign asset reporting, with a deadline of March 31st for the previous tax year, and you have to disclose your assets value abroad by category, for example, bank accounts, properties abroad, etc. Then there is the wealth tax, which is a regional tax, okay, which is an annual tax on net assets with allowances and deductions that depend on the region. And for this, Madrid and Andalusia, you can consider that they don't have wealth tax. Okay, so these are very interesting regions where to move if you want to avoid this tax. And then Catalonia, for example, has the lowest threshold. It kicks in at 500,000 euros. And this tax is also progressive tax rates over the net asset value. Now there is the solidarity tax on large fortunes, which started in 2023. This is a national wealth tax that will apply starting at 3 million euros with allowances and deductions, so much higher threshold, but applicable nationwide. Remember that Spain has double taxation agreements with both the USA, the UK, Australia, Canada, all these countries, in order to avoid being taxed twice. So the tax that you pay in Spain, you will credit it to the tax that you potentially have to pay that year in your origin country. In the USA, as being a passport holder from the US, you always have to file taxes, or at least declare taxes, and then you will get those that credit back, so you don't have to pay twice, let's say. But of course, first you will have to pay the taxes where you're a tax resident, and those may be higher. This is the case of Spain. Make sure to remember regional rules vary significantly, and you must consult a tax advisor. And this is the calculation for the different tax brackets. For 100,000 euros, we already went through that. And this is the effective tax rate for the different amount of income. For example, 30,000 euros, you will pay, round numbers without deductions, ballpark figure, around 24% income tax, going up to 36% when you make 100K of taxable income. Make sure to join my free webinar on Spanish tax overview in 2025 and watch the recordings. And it's, of course, absolutely free. Now, let's go back to non-lucrative visa. We're going to go through all the documentation and then go in depth into each of those requirements. First of all, they will ask you for an address in Spain. Okay, that will vary depending on the consulate. Some consulates are very strict. Some others are more laid back. Laid back ones, they will only want to know in which province you plan to move: Seville, Valencia, Madrid, etc. And some other consulates, they will ask for a rental contract or property deeds in case you own property, which is, according to Ainhoa Manero, the immigration lawyer that I recommend on Spainguru.es, and I interviewed, it is absolutely baffling that some consulates ask for rental contracts, and she always fights it, and she always wins the fight with the consulates, so that they don't ask for rental contracts, really, because it's something that is absolutely out of any interpretation of the rules. But if you want to avoid friction and you can do it and you want to do it, then providing a rental contract sometimes is necessary. Then address in the country of residence. You have to prove that you are a legal resident within the area where your consulate serves. Prove sufficient financial means to support yourself and dependents, if applicable, without working. We're going to go through all this. Have a comprehensive health insurance from a company authorized to operate in Spain. Or if you're a UK retiree, you could use the S1 form to have access to the public healthcare system in Spain. And you can use this instead of submitting a private health insurance for the NLV application. Only if you're a UK retiree, though. You have to show a clean criminal background check or ACRO, police check, medical certificate, which is completely different from the health insurance, where you show that you're free of diseases that could have serious public health repercussions. If you plan to bring spouses, a new marriage certificate. If you plan to bring dependent children, new birth certificates. All this translated in an apostille. We're going to talk about all that. And sometimes you will have to prove that you won't engage in any work or professional activities in Spain. Sometimes you will have to supply a letter of intent. There are templates of letters of intent on spainguru.es. If applicable, as I said, you will have to show marriage, birth certificates, school enrollment for minor children, depending on the consulate, and as I said, rental contracts, and photos, fees payment for each of the applicants, etc., etc. I have interviewed Ainhoa Manero, and I asked her 55 frequently asked questions about the Spanish non-lucrative visa process. I highly recommend you to watch this video because it is, of course, professional answers from a top and experienced immigration expert. Now let's go to the financial requirements in 2025. You have to show proof of sufficient funds. How much money you need to show, including savings and or regular income, so it can be a combination of both. Well, the first main applicant is 400% of the IPREM index 2024. We said 2024 because it stayed the same as last year, or IPREM 2025, and dependent has to show 100% of this index 2024 to 2025. That is translated to euros. Main applicant has to show at least, at the very least, 28,800 euros, and each dependent 7,200 euros. So, for example, if you apply as a couple, there on the right you have the table is 36,000 euros for the initial application. As I said, it can be savings and or passive income, pension withdrawals, rental income, dividends, and rental income. Be careful, we're going to talk about that, but it is not widely accepted. In fact, many consulates won't really accept it, so it should be used as a complement to the main income that you are showing. Bank statements to prove are usually required, and any other documentation from your bank in the US and UK. In case the funds are in different types of accounts, a letter from the bank or the broker stating that it is liquid assets that can be readily accessible without penalties, so that they can be considered as part of your funding proof. Some consulate will also ask for tax returns for even several years sometimes, and especially if you plan to bring dependents, they want to see that they really depend on you financially. You will need double the amount for renewal and double between asterisks, because it's not really that you have to show double the amount in 1 year, but you have to show double the amount for 2 years, because each renewal lasts 2 years. So you have to show that you have enough money for that period of 2 years. That means that if it is passive income and not savings, if you you can, let's say, consider that as double the amount. We're gonna have a case study for that, so you understand exactly how this is calculated, but you have to show double the amount for 2 years if it's savings only. And there are many regional variations depending where you are renewing. They will ask for 1 year or 2 years, but in general you have to consider 2 years. We mentioned the IPREM index. This is an index that is published every single year, that depends on the national budget. There has to be political agreement for the national budget to be updated. There hasn't been any political agreement in 2024, neither in 2025, but it could happen in 2026. And when that happens, they usually raise the index. That means that, for example, now a monthly IPREM is 600 euros or 7,200 euros per year. It could go up to 650 or 700 euros per month, okay? If it goes to 650 euros in 2026, then the main applicant is 31,200 euros. So if you obtain the non-lucrative visa and then you renew, in fact, you will be bound to the new IPREM when you renew. So you have to budget accordingly. $1,000,000 question. Can I work remotely for non-Spanish companies remotely? Yes, I underline. Well, the straight answer is yes, you can. under the non-lucrative visa? Yes, you can. And I have asked this directly to Ainhoa Manero, as I said, expert immigration lawyer. There you have the QR code to watch the video. But basically, the law that defines the Spanish non-lucrative visa doesn't solve this question. It's a gray area. There are a lot of people, and I personally know a lot of people, you can find them on YouTube, for example, that are remotely working for non-Spanish companies and are under the non-lucrative visa. The thing is that if you say this at a Spanish consulate, if you even cause the minus of doubts to the officer in the consulate that you will be working, your visa will be denied ipso facto. Okay, so once you obtain your visa, using your passive income, using your savings and everything, once you are in Spain, it is a gray area if you can work for a non-Spanish company remotely. Okay, and as I said, this is happening, and there is a Supreme Court ruling that actually supports this, and it is very, very easily defensible, and you can renew your visas, as I said, not using active income, but without any issues. So, of course, this is not legal advice. I'm not recommending you to do it. Absolutely not. If you work remotely, there is the Spanish digital nomad visa that may suit your situation better. But this is the legal situation, and this is how I transmit it to you so you can act accordingly. Now, just to give you more examples related to working and related to how crazy the differences are in interpretations among the different consulates. A few months ago, Edinburgh added to their requirements or characteristics of the application of the non-lucrative visa the possibility to work in the UK, but they were considering that the type of work should be special or particular. In this case, there is this Spainguru community member who got the non-lucrative visa proved. The husband worked at the platform of an oil rig in the Northern Sea, close to Scotland. So, and they got the non-lucrative visa. And I asked Ainhoa Manero as well, and she got non-lucrative visas for people who work as, for example, pilots in the US, that they come here, for example, for 1 month, and then they go back to the US to work 15 days as airline pilots. Those type of special jobs are not clearly mentioned in the regulations, but using proper legal advice can give you the possibility to also obtain the non-lucrative visa. Now, let's go to private health insurance requirements. Now, not all policies for health insurance are compliant. First of all, they have to be by Spanish companies authorized to operate in Spain. And the conditions of this insurance, first of all, no co-payments. Okay, everything has to be paid every time that you use the insurance, and doctors, and you see doctors, has to be paid in advance. Some consulates are also strict about reimbursements, such is the case, for example, of Houston and other consulates, that they mention it, and sometimes they don't mention it, but we've seen denials because of reimbursements. So be careful with using so-called compliant private health insurance with reimbursements, because they could be a denial. Okay, it's risky. No waiting periods, so you have to be covered from moment zero. The moment you set foot in Spain, you have to be covered, and it has to be full coverage geographically in Spain and by the different medical disciplines. And I added an asterisk there because there is a big nuance here for people with pre-existing conditions. Now, the usual thing is to pay a full year in advance, okay, because this is what the health insurance companies require in order to issue a certificate of coverage in Spanish that has a specific wording, and that it is a requirement when you submit your Spanish non-lucrative visa file. We're going to talk about pre-existing condition later, but first of all, are my medicines cost covered? No, most of the time, if not all the time. You have to pay the retail price of your medicines once you are under a private health insurance. And even after 1 year, when you have the possibility to pay your access into public healthcare system, you still have to pay for your medicines cost. Even if your pre-existing conditions are covered, the treatments and the whole thing, under the public healthcare system, you still have to pay for your medicine cost. What should be the health insurance start date? So the most common answer, but there are many different answers, but the one I would say everyone, most of the people stick to is you have to start your health insurance the same month in which you plan to enter Spain under the non-lucrative visa. For example, you plan to enter in September 15th, start your health insurance on September 1st. What if I have pre-existing conditions? So here are the nuances. Coming back to the full coverage insurance condition, it will depend on the severity of your pre-existing conditions. For example, if you had cancer in the last 5 years, unfortunately, it's going to be very, very hard to even get a private health insurance that covers you, etc. Okay. If you have something less severe, for example, like high blood pressure, this kind of things, then usually you will be able to obtain a private health insurance that is fully NLV compliant, but they will exclude those pre-existing conditions from coverage, but those will not appear in the certificate of coverage in Spanish, therefore making it possible for you to apply for the Spanish non-lucrative visa. But once you are in Spain, if you have any problem related to it, you will have to pay for it. And potentially, a lot of people, what they do is to pay their access into the public healthcare system and combine those in order to get the treatments covered. Can I pay into the Spanish public system? Yes, I mentioned before, and the cost will be 60 euros if you're younger than 65 years of age, and 157 euros per month if you're older than 65 years of age. And this is called the Convenio Especial. Okay, can I use my current health insurance from the UK and the USA? Short answer is, if it's NLV compliant, yes, you can. Okay, but the long answer is, I don't recommend it. Why? Because UK and USA private health insurances do not consider the use case of you applying for a Spanish non-lucrative visa. For example, they will supply a certificate of coverage that is in English, that doesn't have the correct wording. You have to sworn translate it, potentially creating friction in the process. It could have, because they usually have reimbursement clauses or co-payment clauses that could be also a potential reason of denial. Long story short, there create blocks on the road. I highly don't recommend it. The Spanish ones are good, they are compliant, and they are much cheaper in general. So this is what I recommend in general for this. Can I apply with a UK S1 form if I am a UK retiree? Yes. Do I need a Spanish bank account? No, you don't have to have a Spanish bank account to hire a private health insurance. But if you have one, potentially you would have the option to pay on a monthly basis. Okay, this is for people who were in Spain and already have a Spanish bank account, which is 99% of the cases that doesn't happen. Can there be reimbursements? As I said, sometimes yes, but in many consulates they mention it no. So I would suggest not to go with reimbursements if you don't want to create problems and headaches. Will I get a refund if I am denied? So when you hire a private health insurance for your non-lucrative visa, you have to make sure that it is compliant, but also make sure to read all the conditions, okay? Read all the articles, read all the agreements, read all the contracts, and make sure to understand your cancellation clause, okay, or refund clause. And if you have any doubt, make sure to ask the broker or exclusive agent or the company, what happens in the event if my visa is denied? Will I get full refund? Will I get a partial refund? Do I have to prove that it was denied because of the health insurance, etc., etc.? Because it will depend on each of the different policies whether you're going to get refund or not. If you work with Spainguru's recommendations, you get full refund for a visa denial, okay? But, it depends on the contracts that you're signing. What are the top companies? Okay, so, but first, before going into the top companies, I recently saw that a Spainguru community member in the Washington, D.C., and some other consulate too that I can't remember now, BLS office in Washington is promoting their travel health insurance as a requirement for the non-lucrative visa. This is extremely misleading. This is probably a mistake from BLS office, and definitely you don't need to get that travel health insurance. You need to make sure to have a compliant non-lucrative visa health insurance policy in place, because a travel health insurance will not be accepted. And in fact, I'm sorry for such a noisy slide, but I just couldn't put it all together easier. But basically, even BLS says that the travel insurance will not be accepted, and the Spanish consulate requirements also mentions this. This was just to clarify. And now we're going to go to the big companies that issue compliant health insurance policies. They also issue policies that are not compliant, so always make sure to work with someone who understands that you're applying for a Spanish non-lucrative visa. Biggest company, Adeslas, then you have Asisa, DKV, ASA, Sanitas, Salus, AXA, Caser, Mafre, all these companies and several more. And if size matters, Adeslas is by far the biggest. It is doubled. If you sum Sanitas and Asisa, then that will be the size of Adeslas, and then you have the KV as well. So any of these companies are reputable companies, and they offer compliant private health insurances. I personally recommend Adeslas exclusive agent Carlos Blanco, who is also an immigration lawyer and understands the ins and outs of the Spanish non-lucrative visa process, and has something very interesting and important, which is he can extend the start date of your health insurance, which is something that many companies cannot do. And it is extremely useful, because you will see that probably timing is the most important factor here in order to apply. And sometimes you have decided to start your policy, or they don't let you start your policy after 1 month since hiring it. So this is also something that you need to have in mind and plan accordingly. But if you choose Spainguru's recommended exclusive agent, that won't be an issue. Now let's go to medical certificate. Medical certificate, as we said, is completely different than the health insurance. It is a one-page document that needs to be signed by a doctor, okay? And it has a 3-month validity, so it has to be valid by the time when you apply. And you can use, and it is recommended that you use the template that your specific consulate provides. Normally as a PDF, you will print it. And this template most of the time comes both in English and in Spanish. So this template is important to use because it comes with the right wording, okay? Doctors cannot add things like "to the best of my knowledge" or something like that. No, it has to be specifically this wording. And usually it doesn't need to be apostilled, okay, in most countries. But in the UK, you need to apostille it. For that, the doctor has to be FCDO registered in the UK so that his signature can be apostilled, right? If the template comes only in in English, then you will also have to sworn translated by a Spanish sworn translator. Okay, if you use a template in both languages, make sure that the doctor signs both texts, okay, and not only the English one, and then you would avoid the sworn translation, okay. If you are in the UK, you can use ZoomDoc with a discount of £10 using Spainguru's link, which is an absolutely online service. Everything is online. And it is accepted in all the consulates in the UK, or eventually you could use a Spanish doctor, okay? On Spainguru, you can also find one. The advantages of using a Spanish doctor is that you won't need to sworn translate it, you won't need to apostille it, but some consulates have also strict interpretations of the rules. This is the case of Manchester, I heard Lisbon, I heard San Francisco. Only these 3 consulates so far I've heard of, that they won't accept the Spanish doctor issue certificate if you haven't been in Spain physically at the time and date of issue of the certificate. This is a fully online certificate that you can do via WhatsApp or via Zoom call, but the doctor will advise you whether the certificate is accepted in your consulate. For example, Miami accepts it, Washington, Singapore, London, Edinburgh, all these consulates are accepting the Spanish doctor um, certificate. Frequently asked question: my doctor won't sign the medical certificate template. What can I do? Well, first, change your doctor. Okay. Um, or sometimes the doctors want to perform analysis on your blood, urine, etc. This is crazy. Normally, a visual inspection is enough for them, even online. So make sure to change your doctor, and if you don't have an alternative, maybe consider using um, the Spanish doctor that Spainguru connects you with. My doctor is not FCDO registered. Is his certificate valid? No, has to be registered with the foreign ministry in a foreign office in the UK. That takes only 24 to 48 hours to register. So you can also propose it to your doctor. He can do it online. It is very easy. And then after that, his certificate can be apostilled. How do I know if the Spanish doctor certificate is accepted at my consulate? You can fill the form on Spainguru, contact the doctor. You write in the form which consulate you're applying from, and the doctor will tell you, yes, my certificate has been accepted or not. And this is a table where you can see the differences. And this is also breaking news. I heard someone in Chicago consulate had to obtain an apostille for their medical certificate. In the US, this is the first time that I hear it. This is absolutely crazy, but the way that they did it, I think, is they notarized the certificate and then they apostilled the notarization of the certificate. And this was asked by by the consulate in Chicago. And this is very, very recent. I don't know the full end of the story, how it was, but I hope this person could actually supply it. But it could be that eventually in the US they will start also asking for apostille, although right now it is not the case, except for this strange thing that happened at Chicago. As you can see there, this is the screenshot of this person mentioning it. As I told you, in Chicago. And that was it. That's the whole story about the medical certificate. Now, let's talk about the clean criminal background check. The document that usually takes the longest to obtain, and usually you should start by this document at the beginning of the documentation gathering. It must be squeaky clean during the last 5 years. For the non-lucrative visa, if you live in other jurisdictions, you need also to supply background checks for all those jurisdictions. If you lived in Japan, legally resident in Japan during the last 5 years, you also have to get that police certificate from Japan. In the UK is the ACRO certificate. That needs to be apostilled and sworn translated, has usually a 6-month validity. Please always check with your consulate. FBI background check will require a federal apostille, not a state apostille, and sworn translation usually has a 6-month validity, but always check with your consulate. I could be wrong, or this could change anytime. Let's go through the frequent asked questions. Am I still eligible with records on my background check? This is, again, depends on the severity of or how serious those records are. If you have served conviction time or have blood crimes and stuff like that, even if they happened decades ago, you will be denied. Okay. Then maybe you have different ways to delete those records. Maybe you have expungement processes in your countries. Okay. Make sure to delete those records before applying. Or if you use legal help, a good lawyer, what would do is to compare that crime to a Spanish crime, and in the Spanish law, that crime should be deleted from your record. Then they can make the case that it should also be deleted in your country and potentially not count. Okay, so if you are in this situation, always use legal help, expert immigration lawyers. You can find them on Spainguru. But make sure to make sure that you can apply for the visa, because you can lose a lot of time and money. Am I still? And of course, if you have smaller things, misdemeanors, driving under the influence, smoking pot when you were 25 years and now you're 70, those things usually won't be a problem at all. Okay. And if you have an ACRO and no live trace, that means that it was stepped down and it doesn't show what you did. Some or all of the UK consulates are starting to ask for another document that you have to obtain from the police where it explains exactly what is the record under the non-live trace, just to make sure that the record is not serious. Can I expedite the background check federal apostille? Yes and no. Using the let's say the official procedure with the state the Department of State, you can't. After the COVID, you cannot do it. But if you use private apostille services, you can. On Spainguru, you can find. Can I notarize the background check and use the state apostille instead? People have done that in the past successfully, but now it's a straight denial, so don't do it. Only use federal apostille for your background check. Where can I have my fingerprints taken? That is a USPS post offices. Also, there are channelers that you can you with offices in different cities that you can use to send your fingerprints even outside of the US. In Madrid, for example, and Barcelona, you can find. They're expensive, but you can find. What if my fingerprints are illegible? If that is your case, send me an email to hello@spainguru.es. I can send you links to posts with solutions. Tips or comments related to the criminal background check. How long is this taking? Well, lately it was taking the ACRO in the UK 5 to 6 weeks, so longer time than before. 5 weeks, nearly 6 weeks, so 1 month and a half for that. As I said, it's usually the longest one to obtain. In Canada, it is taking very little. It used to take months, not the police check, but the apostille process afterwards. But now apparently they have solved their problem, so it's going pretty fast. In the US, you obtain your FBI background check electronically within 1 hour, and then there is the apostille process that takes a few weeks. As I said, if you use private services, they can go much faster. Now, proof of not working. So, the Spanish non-lucrative visa is also known as the retirement visa. This is a nickname; it's not official, right? So it is meant to be for people who don't need to work once they move to Spain, and a retiree is the typical, let's say, profile or persona who would submit for this visa, right? So if you show proof of a receipt of a pension, there wouldn't be any doubt that you are retired and that you will not work. But a lot of people want to continue working and only quit provided they get their visas granted. In that case, for example, in the UK, they are quite strict that you need to quit your job even when you apply for the visa, and you need to supply a P45. Okay, although some people avoid doing this and try to submit other proof saying that promising that they will quit their jobs if they get their visa granted, with different results in the UK. In the US, providing a resignation letter or termination letter from your employer, both translated and notarized. Okay, and if you're freelancers in the US, a notarized affidavit promising not to work. In the UK, a letter from HMRC and accountant stating having ceased trading and deregistered for self-employment. So, as we said, should I quit before I get the visa? Well, if you don't want to quit, actually this should be the fair thing to do, because you don't know if you're going to get the visa or not. Actually, you shouldn't do it, okay? But make sure that you understand what are your consulate requirements in order not to create friction. If you go with legal advice, actually this is much safer, because if any problem arises, your lawyer will defend your position and for sure will be right, okay? But in the US, it is much more common, the situation in which people work until the very last minute. Is renting out a property considered a job? No, if you only have a property or two and you are not in the daily operations, if it's a long-term rental, absolutely no problem. But if you have 30 properties and you rent them on Airbnb, it could be considered to be an active income, and for that you would need to appoint, this is a suggestion from Spainguru community members, you will need to appoint a property manager so that it is clear that it's passive income. Is investing in stocks considered active income? No. Can I volunteer while on an LLV? Yes, you can, as long as you don't get paid for anything, okay? And I actually recommend it because You will help others, you will help yourself, you will get community connections, you will enjoy your life better, and you will probably learn Spanish better, connect with other people. So I highly recommend it, in fact, and I never heard anyone having problems by volunteering under a non-lucrative visa in Spain, as long as you don't get paid. Still working at the time of application. Here are a couple of screenshots about people who were still working. So first member says a P45 in the UK is one way, but so is a letter from your employer stating that you have resigned and will leave on a certain date. Someone else says, looks like a bit of a potluck if they accept a letter from HR department in place of a P45, if working up to the last minute. A lot of people asking about this in London, in Manchester, and it's not very, very clear. Most of people supply the P45. But in the US, as we said, they are more used to this situation. And Ali says that the Los Angeles consulate, now it's BLS, will accept a notarized letter of intent that states you plan on quitting upon obtaining the visa before leaving to Spain. So yes, USA is much more open to this situation. But there's a special case here. This is something that I want to convey to you. The consulate has to be absolutely clear that you will not work once you are in Spain. Okay, this is the case of a Venezuelan national who applied for the Spanish non-lucrative visa at the Buenos Aires consulate in Argentina, who was denied of the visa because this person showed activity in their LinkedIn. Okay, and this person actually brought this to court, to the Madrid court, and lost. The court in Madrid said that the consulate was right, and make sure to not show any activity on LinkedIn when you apply for the Spanish non-lucrative visa. Make sure to don't create any doubts about your future activities in Spain. Let's talk about marriage, birth certificates, and non-married couples. Married couples need a valid and updated certificates, usually 6 months validity, from the country where they married. Okay, if you married in Cyprus or in Trinidad and Tobago, it has to be from that country, obviously, and will need to be apostilled in that country and sworn translated to Spanish. Children will need, again, new birth certificates, same procedure. If they born in another country, you will need, as I said, the same as marriage certificate. Non-married couples can apply, but it will depend on the consulate how strict they are to consider you a couple or not. You will need to prove your relationship. The best you can do is to show that you are legal partners, okay? And then that's a strong case, but then you can supply other proof like having children together, joint accounts, joint rental contracts. But if you only supply those, that will be a weaker case, and potentially you won't be able to apply as a couple. In that case, maybe the solution is to apply as two main applicants with different funding requirements, of course. All these documents need to be apostilled and sworn translated. Frequently asked questions. What about adult children and ascendants? Yes. What is an adult children? Is your children over 18 years of age without age limit? And ascendants, your parents. If you prove that they are part of the same family, so you prove that they are not married, for example, in case of your adult children, that they are financially dependent on you, and usually providing tax certificates and showing that they are depending on you, then they would be accepted. And this is more details about this situation. Now, we mentioned sworn translations. Who are exactly the sworn translators and how they are different from a standard or normal translator? Sworn translators are accredited by the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, first of all, and they need to pass a very difficult exam to become certified by this ministry. Each sworn translator has a unique registration number. Their translations are accepted by all Spanish institutions, including the consulates and BLS offices, of course. Translations are done remotely and signed with a legally valid signature. Therefore, no physical mail is needed. Everything is, you scan the documents, you send it by mail, and they will send you back the sworn translation, and you print that and you submit that to the consulate, and that is accepted by your consulate. And of course, you can find recommended sworn translations on spainguru.es. for very affordable prices and very used to the application for non-lucrative visa. Frequently asked questions. Can I use any translator from the American Translator Association? I mentioned this because I've seen this link in Miami Consulate and in Los Angeles Consulate, and it is extremely misleading because translators from that association are not sworn translators. They need to be appointed by the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Can a sworn translator work with several language pairs? No, they only work with one language pair, English-Spanish, for example. How much do sworn translation cost? For the usual typical documentation for the Spanish non-lucrative visa is about 40 euros per page. What comes first, apostille then sworn translation? Well, depending who you ask, you will get a different answer. Lawyers will always tell you to be on the safe side. You obtain the original document, you send it for apostille, the apostille comes back, and then you sworn translate the original document and the apostille. Some people decide not to translate the apostille because sometimes it comes also in Spanish, but some people found denials of this document because the text in Spanish in the apostille is in how you say, it doesn't contain all the content of the original document, and if the official reviewing your file says this is not enough, he could ask you for a new document. Okay, this is the long answer. But of course, if you want to save money and less sworn translations, the same applies for bank statements. Also, $1 million question. Should I sworn translate all the bank statements? I know a Manero, top immigration lawyer, says I sworn translate every single page of the bank statements because she received denials because of not doing it. But these are rare cases. Most of people don't sworn translate the bank statements or only translate the summary pages. Okay, sworn translate, because otherwise it could be a big cost on sworn translations, but it is up to you how safe you want to play it. And if you want to know more, I have interviewed not only Ainhoa, but also Sofia Mejail of CABR Relocation Solutions about the non-lucrative visa. And of course, you get expert answers there. Remember that there is a Q&A session at the end of this presentation. So make sure to ask your questions, adding a question mark at the end so it is easy for me to understand your questions. And if you think the information that I shared today is useful and you're learning something new today, please leave a Trustpilot review. There is a button on the top of your screen that will redirect you to Trustpilot, and only takes 5 seconds to leave a review there. Thank you so much. Now let's continue with the webinar. Now, during the application, all family members must apply. In most cases, especially for BLS offices, there are in-person applications and or pickup of the passports. Some consulates only do it by mail or a combination of mail and in person, or they give you the option. But most of them, they do it in person, especially if they have BLS office. Something to understand is that the non-lucrative visa will grant you a 90-day window to arrive in Spain. So there is a window of validity in which you need to enter Spain in order to validate your non-lucrative visa. Common mistakes to avoid is not checking the specific consulate requirements in English, in Spanish, and the BLS office requirements as well. Compare them and see if there is anything different among those requirements, and always play it safe. Submitting wrong or expired documents. Many documents have a validity period. Wrong chronology, starting by the easy stuff before and leave the difficult stuff at the end. Wrong health insurance policy, not compliance policy. Some consulates are also asking for the receipt of payment for the policy also, so not submitting that. Say that you plan to work or not showing enough proof that you will not work, or not being convincing enough to the officer that you will not work, especially if you are in working age, like especially if you are, let's say, young enough to be working, you need to make a case that you will not work under the non-lucrative visa. Timing. How much in advance should I start preparing before moving to Spain? Usually 6 months from decision-making phase until the intended date of entry to Spain. Most consulates will retain your passport while the visa is processed. In the USA, you could get a second passport potentially, and it is somewhat easy. In the UK, it's very difficult to obtain a second passport because you have to fulfill different conditions, and applying for a Spanish visa is not one of them. So consider that. But sometimes the BLS office, if you make the case, for example, I need to travel to Spain to buy a property, maybe they let you keep your passport. Okay. And now, also some consulate and BLS offices, they give you the options to leave prepaid envelopes so that they send you your passport with your visa, or sometimes they don't have this service and you have to pick up your passport at the office, and all the family members that applied have to be at that time. So it can be quite cumbersome, especially if you live far away from the consulate location. How long does the process take? As we said, normally documents preparation 2 to 3 months, depending how difficult your case is. Attending the appointment on the third month, wait for the approval, 2 months approximately, average maximum 3 months, sometimes longer, even if not official. 10 days period is offered when they request you for additional documentation or clarifications. You can choose the visa start date in a 90-day window from the application date. Okay. And then depending on how the consulate processes your visa, they will grant you the date that you chose or a date close to it. And officially, once you enter Spain, you need to obtain a tarjeta de identidad extranjero, the plastic card with your face, within 30 days of entering Spain, and that tarjeta de residencia or residency card will be valid for 1 year. Someone said, for the timing, you can ask for the visa to be valid for up to 3 months in advance. However, the difficulty I found was finding a health insurance company who will work that far out, as most only do 2, and now most only do 1 month in advance. So be careful with those details that can bring you a headache there. Now, a little bit more visual. Imagine that you submit your papers for the non-lucrative visa in the date marked as letter A in this timeline. You can choose a visa validity start date within 90 days of the submission date. So you select letter B, for example, in the future, at the end of the third month. Now, imagine that you obtain your non-lucrative visa and the consulate accepts the date that you selected for entering Spain. And you obtain your visa, you fly to Spain, and you enter on letter B. Okay, and the end of the third month, you will have to enter Spain. Sorry, I made a mistake. Once you get your visa, the start date of your visa starts a period of 90 days in which you can enter Spain anytime during those 90 days. Imagine that you fly to Spain on letter C, that is at the beginning of the third month of that period. Okay, and once you enter, you have 30 days to obtain the TIE card. And usually, the TIE card, if you enter within the visa validity date, the TIE card start date will be the day that you enter Spain. The police officer giving you the TIE card is the one who has to write this. And then the first renewal will happen 1 year after. And the renewal, you can do it sometime during also a window, which starts 60 days prior to the expiration date of your TIE card and up to 90 days after the expiration date. I hope all this makes sense because it could be a bit difficult or complicated. Now, how is the visa application process? And this is just a visual slide, but some of these things, or most of the things, can overlap, and some things can come first and then after, because depending on your situation, or for example, if it is very difficult to obtain appointments at your BLS office, maybe sometimes people start trying to get the appointments even before they started gathering their documents. So take this with a pinch of salt, and let's start. First, you find your assigned Spanish consulate where you are a legal resident. Second, you check your specific consulate requirements and or BLS office requirements as well. You have to start collecting the necessary documents for your visa application. Start by the longest ones, usually FBI background check or ACRO in the UK. Then obtain your medical certificate, which has a 3-month validity. you will have to apostille the official documents and medical certificate in the UK, swan translate the documents that are not in Spanish, all right, and then make sure to get your private health insurance, make sure that the start date aligns with your intended entry date, and then book an appointment with your consulate or BLS office, attend that appointment, submit the papers, and wait for the notification or resolution. If there are no clarification periods, you will collect your visa or receive it in your home, depending on where you're applying. And then once you arrive to Spain, something that people told me you should add to this is you have to obtain an empadronamiento when you arrive, because when you go to request your TA card to the police station, 95% of the times they will ask you for an empadronamiento. The empadronamiento is a certificate that shows proof of your address in Spain. So you have, once you come to a certain city, you take your rental contract, you go to the city hall, and you obtain a certificate that states that you are a legal, that you legally are staying at that place, and that acts as a proof of address for the police in order to issue the TA card. Now, let's go back to taxes, because this is a very much asked question. How can I avoid capital gains tax in the event in which I want to sell my home in my home country? So the best way you can do it is to sell your home before you become a tax resident in Spain. Okay, of course there are ways to mitigate this tax in Spain. If you're older than 65, if you reinvest the sale of your property abroad into a Spanish property in Spain. But the best way altogether is just to avoid it, and for that it would be necessary to do the correct timing. So there are two options. First, example, you sell your property in 2024 and you move to Spain in 2025. They fall into different tax years, so you are not liable for CGT on your sale. But if you plan to sell your property in the same tax year in which you become a tax resident, then you will be liable for CGT in Spain. In that case, make sure to, if you sell, for example, on January 2nd, 2025, okay, don't become a tax resident in Spain on 2025. That is, move to Spain after July 2nd. So you spend less than 182 days in Spain, therefore 1 day less than the required for becoming a tax resident in Spain. And also make sure that you haven't been in Spain the previous months in the year, because they also count. If you want to know more about taxes, I have tons of content on Spainguru and on the Spainguru YouTube channel. Now let's move to after the approval. Now, living in Spain on a non-lucrative visa. How you arrive to Spain? There are two ways. You arrive from outside of Schengen or from inside Schengen. If you arrive from outside Schengen to Spain, you will get a Spanish stamp. Perfect. But if you travel to another Schengen country and then to Spain, you will get a stamp from that other Schengen country, and that doesn't count to activate your visa. You need to get a Spanish document. Okay, so if you, for example, drive from the UK to Spain, you cross France, you get a stamp in France, you arrive to Spain, you cross the border, you need to get a declaración de entrada. You go to a national police station, you say that you enter Spain, you have 72 hours to do it, and they will sign you a one-pager document that says this person entered to Spain on this certain date, because this document will be asked when you go for the TA card. Okay. So for this, I highly recommend you entering Spain when your visa is valid, within the 90 days validity period. Can you enter as a tourist? Yes, you can, but it brings certain difficulties. It's too long to explain. I have content about that, but basically, the best you can do is to enter Spain within the visa validity period. Recommendations: get a Spanish SIM card to receive SMS, open a non-resident bank account, because it can take months to obtain your tarjeta de identidad extranjero or TA card, and you will need to pay your rent, utilities, gym, whatever. Obtain an empadronamiento, as we said before, that is valid for 3 months. And as we said, you have to obtain your TA card within officially 30 days time limit. Okay. Frequently asked question, is the padrón strictly necessary to obtain the TIE? There are no appointments to obtain the TIE. What should I do? And for this, I will quote a lawyer that is a Spainguru community member that said, for the TIE appointment, in practice, it is not required within 1 month because appointments can take up to 6 months without issue. The sooner the better, but there is no immediate rush. This is extremely common. Nobody gets a TIE card within 1 month. Now, the empadronamiento for the TIE, it is officially, actually, is not a requirement for the TIE. And big police stations usually know this, but the smaller police stations will require for a empadronamiento. And the fact that there are no available appointments will push you to actually try to get an appointment in any police station within the same province. It has to be in the same province. And the best would be to go to that appointment with the empadronamiento just to make sure that there is no friction. But many police stations accept other proof of address, like, for example, Airbnb receipts. That could also work. But, for example, in Madrid, no, they want empadronamiento. That's for sure. Now, this lawyer in Valencia, Gandia, Alcira, and I also heard here in the Central Police Station in Malaga, they're not requiring empadronamiento. You just show a rental contract, Airbnb receipt, etc. But as I said, if you can get the empadronamiento, try to do it. Now, renewal process. How and when to renew your non-lucrative visa. As we said, you have 1 year to do it, and you can renew it within a period that starts 60 days before expiration of your TIE card and up to 90 days of your TIE card expiration. You will have to show financial requirements for the renewal. If you are providing only savings, double the amount of the initial application if the IPREM stay the same. But if you receive passive income, pension, or pension, for example, then the calculation is a bit different. We're going to see that, okay? And the funds need to be available in the account when renewing. I recently asked people in which account they had their funds for the renewal, okay, or their passive income, and most of them, they said they use the UK accounts, US accounts, accounts abroad. But I know there are regions that they want to see activity in a Spanish account, for example, in the Canary Islands. Okay, so make sure to know this when you're going to renew and prepare accordingly. Now, the first renewal will grant you 2 more years, and then there's a second renewal for year 4 and 5. Okay, and then potentially you could apply for the long-term residence, also known as permanent residence, with requirements that you need to comply. Now, changes effective May 20th. As we said, the new ruling of the law takes effect on May 20th, and they kept the same renewal periods as 2 years each, and they added a 183-day minimum stay requirements in order to renew the visa. But this is a legal ambiguity. I asked Ainhoa Manero, I have videos about this, about the 183 days minimum requirements, and she says that there is a Supreme Court ruling that already deleted the requirement from the current reglamento or ruling, and this applies again for the new reglamento, even if it's not being deleted, even if this reglamento will not take effect. It is, according to her advice, it is not possible to enforce the minimum requirement because of this Supreme Court ruling, but we still have to see what happens, because right now people are staying less than 180 days in Spain, not becoming tax residents, and still be able to renew their non-lucrative visa. So it is very, very, very possible, and according to Ainhoa Manero, sure, that the same situation happens even with the new reglamento. Case study. Let's talk about the money calculation for the renewal. Imagine you have a couple. As we know, a couple for the initial application is 36,000 euros. Okay, so what would be the double the amount? How much would they need for 2 years of renewal? They would need 36,000 for the first year and 36,000 for the second year, right? But imagine that the first, one of the members of the couple receives a pension of 15,000 euros per year. That means that this person will receive 30,000 euros in 2 years, right? That counts as 30,000 euros. It means that in order to get to 72,000 euros, they need to provide additional 42,000 euros. That could be, for example, savings, okay, or other types of passive income, okay. And what about rental income? As I said, it is not widely accepted because it is considered an unsafe type of income. Your tenants can stop paying you anytime, and foreign offices and consulates don't like it at all, okay. Some of them they will accept, okay, but usually don't count too much on it. Although there are people who were approved purely on rental income, and there are successful cases there, it is a bit of a gamble, and I wouldn't count too much on it if you can. Documents requirements: ongoing, you need to present ongoing private medical insurance coverage or access to the public healthcare system. Don't count on using the Convenio Especial for the first renewal because it usually takes weeks or months to have effective access to it, and the first renewal happens after the first year of your visa, and it won't give you time to use it, so you will have to renew your private health insurance. Don't let any gaps of coverage in your private health insurance. It is a reason for denial, okay. Today I published a case on Spainguru.es about this, someone who had a gap and got the renewal denial. So make sure there's no gaps, even 1 day, okay. Updated passport copies for both individuals in case of this couple. Ongoing health coverage, no police records. No police records, also a reason of renewal denial. For example, if you were driving under the influence in Spain, you will get a police records and potentially a reason for denial. And for the renewal, for most regions, you need to show an empadronamiento, okay? Although I have the case of someone who renewed in Granada, who said that it wasn't a requirement in Granada. But as you see, there are many variations. It's impossible to keep them all in mind. Time you need to spend in Spain to maintain your residence. As we said previously, it's 180 days. Supreme Court deleted that, but now we have a new ruling that at 183 days in Spain, lining it up to the Spanish tax residency period. But there is a legal ambiguity because the Supreme Court, it is said by lawyers that they won't be able to enforce this because of this Supreme Court ruling, okay? Because basically, the Supreme Court said that this minimum requirement to stay in Spain has to be included in the main law, in the ley orgánica, and not in the ruling. But the government, it is not so easy to change the main law. You need more support in the Congress, let's say, to change the law. So that's why they don't do it this way. They do a quick fix in the new ruling, but the Supreme Court says that this is legally is not correct. So this is the situation today. Long-term residence. First of all, after 5 years, you could potentially go into long-term residence, which is awesome, which much less requirements. But you need to make sure that you haven't been outside more than 10 months in the previous 5 years in order to obtain it. And this is out of Spain, not Schengen, Spain. If you didn't comply with this, potentially you could renew for a third renewal called Extraordinaria for 2 more years, but not all regions allow it. For example, Galicia doesn't allow it. And then potentially you could use this longer period to comply with the minimum stay requirement for the long-term residence. And if you plan to apply for nationality, if you're a holder of a temporary residence like the Non-Lucrative visa, you can't be out of Spain more than 3 months in the previous 2 years, I believe. And if you're a holder of long-term residence, they permit you a little bit longer. For example, you cannot be outside of the European Union more than 1 year consecutively, like 12 months consecutive, or no more than 30 months in 5 years. So make sure to count those periods well. And this is more explanation about the minimum requirement, which creates legal ambiguity for the renewal of non-lucrative visa. You can watch this later. Basically, these are screenshots of all the laws. But now, if you plan to transition to work permit after 1 year, there are different ways to do it. And when we're talking about work permit is the Spanish work permit that allows you to work in Spain for Spanish companies, okay? So there are several routes. I'm talking about three, the main ones. The first one, you could start your own business. It's called permiso por cuenta propia. Okay, you would present a project, and if the project is studied by a unit in the government and says it's okay, they will grant you the work permit. Okay, if you receive a job offer and a company is able to sponsor you, you would have a work permit of cuenta ajena. Okay, and this usually it is easier after 1 year of non-lucrative residence. It is much easier than if you do it directly. Okay, because you can also apply for these work permits um, before the non-lucrative residence, but it's going to be harder. And also, we said that recently they created the digital nomad visa or teleworker visa. If you plan to work remotely from within Spain, maybe this is your visa. But also, as we said, there is a gray area of a lot of people who are under a non-lucrative visa working remotely for non-Spanish companies who want to transition to the digital nomad visa. And this is also happening. It's being successful, and the immigration authorities accept the fact that these people are working remotely without issues, and they are transitioning them to a digital nomad visa, further underlining the gray area in this situation. Now, if you plan to obtain the Spanish passport, there you have a map. The countries in gray usually, and we're talking about residency. By residency, obtaining the Spanish passport or residency, the countries in gray take 10 years of legal residence before being able to apply for Spanish passport. Countries in red, so Ibero-American countries and other countries with cultural ties to Spain, like Philippines, Andorra, Portugal, Brazil, and Guinea Equatorial, can apply after only 2 years of legal residency in Spain. And of course, the non-lucrative residence counts towards it. So this is very interesting for dual citizens, for example, Mexican passport holders and American passport holders, or Puerto Ricans, etc. But they have to be by origin. You cannot naturalize yourself in Mexico, for example. You have to either born in Mexico or have one Mexican parent. The same applies to Puerto Rico, and only by origin the 2-year fast track works. Of course, if you marry a Spaniard, you only need 1 year of legal residence in Spain in order to apply for the Spanish citizenship, and there are other ways to become Spanish citizen. This is just a summary. And just closing up before going to a Q&A, just for the people who were in the beginning, you can use Spainguru for many different resources. You have free resources, the newsletter that I send every Monday, YouTube channel with one video per day, the Facebook groups, Reddit groups with more than 140,000 members, and blog with 1,700 blog posts, half of them probably about the non-lucrative visa. But if you need professional help, I have personally vetted for several years immigration experts that help you with the non-lucrative visa, tax advisors, financial planners, NLV compliant health insurance, medical certificate, sworn translation, apostle services. All those services potentially you would need either if you do it by yourself or if you plan to go with help, and auxiliary services that if you move to Spain you will need, like bank accounts, money transfer services, property rental, mortgages. Just check Spainguru. It is absolutely free to do it. I have negotiated or obtained different discounts for the different services, and it could be interesting for you to know that those exist. And this is a bonus slide. I asked people on March 1st, did you use professional help in the Spainguru Facebook group for non-lucrative visa? 128 votes, 50-50%. Half of them did it themselves, the application of the non-lucrative visa, and the other half used lawyers. And then I asked, if you use a lawyer, do you think it was worth the investment? About 80% of people answered that it was, and 23% of people said that it wasn't. So I would say that the vast majority of people are happy with the lawyer services. Of course, they didn't necessarily use my recommendations, but in general, if you want to make things smoother and less stressful, definitely going with legal help makes sense, especially if you have maybe some criminal record or some difficult situation. Having a lawyer side by side will make it easier, especially if the lawyer is experienced in your particular consulate. And if you want to stay in touch, you can send me always an email to hello@spainguru.es. I always answer my emails, maybe not the same hour or day, but I always answer. And if I don't know the answer, I will at least point you in the right direction. Facebook group, join the Spanish Non-Lucrative Visa Facebook group, watch the YouTube videos, join the newsletter, read the content. And disclaimer, the content of this webinar is for information purposes only and is not legal advice. The requirements listed here are not official. Please check your specific consulates and BLS offices requirements. Now let's go to the Q&A session. And if you haven't done so yet, you know there's a button there on the top that will bring you to Trustpilot. If you think the content of this webinar is helpful, please leave a review on Trustpilot. It will make me extremely happy. Thank you so much. Now let's go to the questions. Francisco, can I NLV resident attend a university in Spain? Yes, you can. You can study under the non-lucrative visa. Of course, the entry requirements for the different universities, I'm not entering into those details, but as per your immigration status, yes, definitely you can study in Spain with a non-lucrative visa or residence. Just to make sure the difference between non-lucrative visa and residence, the visa is the paper that they stick on your passport that has a 90-day validity, but once you obtain your TE card, your tarjeta de identidad de extranjero, you are a non-lucrative resident, okay? The visa is no longer valid. Elio, can saving in the form of mutual funds in an investment account count towards the financial requirements or an NLV visa? So I won't enter into the details. Of course, I wouldn't give you any legal or financial advice on this. I'm the lawyer and I don't know your funds. So I can tell you that the general rule for this is that you need to prove that those funds are readily available. They can be made liquid at any time, and there is no penalty in doing so. For that, you will have to prove it with a document or a letter from the manager of these funds, okay? And then those could be considered for the funding requirements. But be careful, because it could be that they are not considered liquid enough, okay? So be careful with that. Also, you can ask in the Spainguru dedicated NLV group this question, and for other people who use the same type of funds, and maybe they will give you a better answer than me. Francisco, in Miami, is the application filed at the consulate or with BLS? Miami is BLS. They work with BLS. And you can also go on Spainguru.es, because I have a lot of first-hand experiences about the Miami consulate, and I will share with you the link to the consulate of Miami, so you can benefit from all that information and all the official links. This is the page on Spainguru for Miami consulate, and if you go down, you will see different first-hand experiences. The last one is March 2025, so it's really updated, and I hope you find it useful. And if you haven't done it yet, please join my Spanish Non-Lucrative Visa Facebook group here with 20,000 members. It is extremely active, and you can always mention from which consulate you're applying from, because each consulate is very different, and the quality of the answers will be much different than if you don't mention your consulate. So that's the end of the questions. Thank you so much for joining today. I hope you found this webinar helpful. Looking forward to so that you receive your visas. If you apply, I'll be praying for you that you receive your visas. But of course, it's a long way. If you need anything along the way, send me an email to hello@spainguru.es. I will make sure to answer you under the best of my knowledge and my possibilities, or at least give you links to resources, free and not free, professional resources, but everything that I know, I will share it with you, and I'm sure you're going to find that answer. At least I'm doing the best I can. Thank you so much for joining today, Elio, thank you very much. Francisco, and everyone else for joining today, especially for the ones who had to wake up very early, for the ones who are far away from Spain. Thank you again, and see you around. Goodbye.